It was a sunny afternoon, the sky was clear, and the garden was filled with the smell of fresh flowers. Soft music played in the background as guests smiled, took pictures, and waited for the ceremony to begin. Everyone looked happy, a kind of happiness that only weddings can bring. The bride was glowing in her white dress. She held her father's arm and waited behind the curtains. The groom stood proudly at the altar, dressed in a sharp blue suit, smiling at everyone who passed by. Friends and family had traveled from far to be part of this day, but not everyone felt welcome. In the back row, far from the front, sat a quiet family, a middle-aged black man, a woman wearing a simple floral dress, and a teenage boy. They didn't talk much. They clapped politely when the music changed. They sat straight, their eyes calm but nervous. People near them whispered, "Do you know them? No? Are they from the bride's side? I don't think so." The man didn't seem to notice, or maybe he chose not to. He looked around the garden, his eyes full of memories or something deeper. He smiled when he saw the groom at the altar. Then came the whisper. A rich, older guest with a golden watch and sharp eyes leaned toward the wedding planner. He pointed toward the quiet family at the back. "I don't think they belong here," he said quietly. The planner looked confused. "You mean they weren't invited? They don't look like they were. Just look at them. Doesn't fit this kind of wedding. But just do something. Call someone. They're probably crashing the wedding." The planner hesitated, then nodded nervously. 5 minutes later, 2 police cars rolled up outside the garden. The music was still playing. The guests were still smiling. But everything changed when the police officers stepped into the garden. The bride, waiting to walk down the aisle, saw them first. Her face tightened. "Why are the police here?" she asked. The groom also noticed and took a step forward. The officers, serious and calm, walked straight toward the quiet family. People turned to look, some whispered again, some frowned. The music stopped. The officers spoke softly, but everyone near them could hear. "Sir, can we speak with you for a moment?" one officer said to the man. The man stood slowly. "Of course," he said, polite and respectful. The woman beside him grabbed his hand. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Just stay calm," he told her, and gently pulled away. The teenage boy looked around, scared. The 3 of them were led toward the entrance of the garden. The groom moved forward, but one of the wedding staff held him back. "It's fine, sir. Let them handle it." But it didn't feel fine. The bride stepped away from her father. "What is happening?" she whispered. The rich guest who whispered earlier now had a small smile on his face. He looked satisfied, as if he had just solved a big problem. The officers and the man stopped just outside the entrance. "Sir," the taller officer said, "we received a call that some guests might not be invited." The man raised his eyebrows. "Really? Can we see your invitation, please?" "I don't have a card, but I was invited." "By whom?" The man looked around as if searching for someone. Then he said, "I was invited by the groom." "I know him. I used to teach him." The officers paused on inside. The bride heard his words. Her heart skipped a beat. "Teach him? What does he mean?" she asked, looking at her maid of honor. "I don't know," her friend replied. "Did your friend ever tell you about an old teacher?" "No, never." The groom's face went pale. He looked shocked, almost frozen in place. "What is going on?" One of his cousins whispered. "Did he really invite them?" The rich guest stepped closer to the groom. "You know those people?" he asked, annoyed. The groom didn't answer. Back at the entrance, the man stood tall, though his voice was gentle. "I met him years ago. He was just a child then. Quiet, smart, but poor. He didn't have much. I was his teacher. I saw something special in him. I helped him. He told me he was getting married and that I should come see him become a man." The officers looked at each other. One of them softened his voice. "Do you remember his name?" The man smiled gently. "Of course. But I knew him by his nickname, Little J. He used to sit in the front row, always hungry, always focused. He had big dreams." Inside, the groom suddenly stepped forward, his eyes wide with emotion. "I invited them," he said loudly. The bride turned sharply. The guests all turned too. "I invited him," the groom repeated, louder this time. "That man taught me everything. He gave me my first real chance in life." The garden went completely silent. The bride stared at her future husband, her eyes filled with confusion, then slowly, understanding. The rich guest's face turned red. The officers nodded politely. To the man, "Sorry for the misunderstanding, sir," one said. "Please, enjoy the wedding." The man smiled again. "Thank you, officers." He turned to his wife and son. "It's okay. Let's go back inside." They walked slowly, heads held high. And as they passed, the guests who had whispered and judged them moments earlier, not a single person could look them in the eyes. The wedding garden was still quiet. People whispered, but no one smiled anymore. The music had stopped. The officers stood near the gate, watching as the quiet black family walked back inside. The man held his wife's hand now, and his son stayed close to them. Everyone stared at them, not with fear this time, but with surprise, confusion, and maybe guilt. The groom walked toward them slowly. His face was serious now. He didn't smile. He stood in front of the man, his old teacher, and for a moment, he couldn't speak. Then he whispered, "You really came." The man smiled kindly. Of course I did. I told you I would. The groom's voice shook. I didn't think you would actually show up. Not after all these years. I had to see the boy I once taught become the man he dreamed of. The guests around them listened silently. Some felt ashamed for judging, some felt curious. Others felt guilty. The bride came forward slowly, standing beside her husband. She looked at the man, then his wife, then his son. I'm sorry, she said softly. I didn't know who you were. The woman gave her a small nod. It's okay, dear. You had no reason to know. The police, still watching, began to walk back toward their cars. But one of them, the younger officer, turned back. Sir, he said to the groom, is everything all right now? Yes, the groom replied. These people were not only invited, they're family to me. The officer nodded respectfully and said nothing more as the police cars drove away. The guests began talking again, this time with shame in their voices. The rich guest who made the complaint tried to walk away quietly, but the groom saw him. You, he called out. The man stopped. He didn't turn around. The groom stepped closer. You called the police, didn't you? The guest didn't answer. The bride's mother, now standing nearby, said, Why would you do such a thing? This is a wedding. Still, the guest didn't speak. He just looked down. The groom shook his head. He looked at their skin and decided they didn't belong. That says more about you than it does about them. The bride touched her husband's arm. Come on, don't waste your words on him. The groom nodded. He turned to his teacher. Please, he said, come sit in the front row. I want you to be close when I say my vows. Mr. Thomas, the teacher, looked surprised. His eyes watered slightly. Thank you, Jay. That means more to me than you know. They walked together toward the front. The bride gave her hand to Mr. Thomas's wife and smiled warmly. The teenage boy looked around, shy but proud. It was the first time anyone at that wedding truly saw them. Back at the altar, the music started again, but the feeling had changed now. There was emotion, respect, curiosity, and deep interest. Guests whispered in a different way now. Who is he, really? Why was he so important to the groom? I want to know their story. Even the wedding photographer, who had paused his work earlier, picked up his camera again and began capturing the moment. He focused on the teacher, the man who had once given food and books to a poor child, the same child who now stood tall, in a suit, about to marry the love of his life. The bride leaned closer to her groom and asked quietly, Why didn't you ever tell me about him? The groom looked at her, a sad smile on his lips. I didn't think anyone would believe it, he said, that I went from nothing to this. You should have told me, she said gently. I wanted to surprise you, he replied, but not like this. They shared a small laugh, though there was still tension in the air. Then the music grew louder. The ceremony was ready to begin again. Guests returned to their seats. The wedding planner, now red in the face, apologized softly to Mr. Thomas. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to. Mr. Thomas smiled gently. It's all right. Just remember, kindness first, always. The planner nodded and walked away, clearly shaken. At the front row, Mr. Thomas sat with his wife and son. He looked proud but quiet, as if his heart was full, but his mouth had no words. The groom looked at him once more before turning to face the altar. This was no longer just a wedding. It was something bigger. A moment of truth, a moment of honor, a moment that would soon reveal even more secrets. And the story was just beginning. The music played once again, soft and sweet. The wedding ceremony restarted, but something had changed. People weren't just watching the bride and groom now. They were also watching the man in the front row, the quiet teacher whose presence had stopped the entire event. Mr. Thomas sat still, his wife beside him, and his son gently holding her hand. The groom tried to focus, but his mind was racing. He looked at the faces of the guests, the judge waiting to marry them, his bride, standing beside him, looking beautiful but thoughtful, and then his eyes stopped on Mr. Thomas. Memories began flooding in. He remembered a small classroom, dusty floors, worn-out books, and one kind teacher who stayed after class every day to help him read. He remembered walking to school with empty pockets and an empty stomach, and Mr. Thomas giving him a sandwich, pretending he had made too many. He remembered the night he cried in school because he couldn't pay for the final exam, and Mr. Thomas quietly slipping an envelope under his notebook. The groom blinked hard. He took a deep breath. I need to say something before we continue, he said suddenly, turning to the guests. The bride looked surprised. The judge paused. The crowd leaned forward. The groom stepped away from the altar and looked directly at Mr. Thomas. I want everyone to know, he said, that I would not be standing here today if this man hadn't believed in me. A soft murmur moved through the crowd. The groom turned toward the guests. You all know me now as a successful man, a businessman, someone who made it. But I came from nothing. I used to sit in the back of the class, hoping no one would notice my torn shoes. He paused. And one day, this man, Mr. Thomas, noticed me, not to judge me, but to help me. People were quiet now, listening closely. He gave me food when I was hungry. He gave me time when no one else cared. He paid for my exams so I wouldn't miss my future. The bride's eyes began to water. He taught me that I was more than just my situation, that I had a mind, a heart, and a future worth fighting for. Some guests began to nod. Some wiped tears. Mr. Thomas looked down at his hands. His lips trembled, and his wife squeezed his arm gently. The groom continued. When I found him again last month, after all these years, I begged him to come. I told him, "Sir, I am who I am because of you. Please be there when I start this next chapter." His voice cracked a little, and he said yes. The crowd stayed silent. No one moved. Even the rich guest who had called the police now looked uncomfortable in his seat, shrinking. The groom looked back at Mr. Thomas. "You never asked for thanks," he said. "But today, I want the world to know what you did." Mr. Thomas stood slowly, unsure. Eyes wet, the groom walked over and hugged him tightly. The entire garden clapped. The bride wiped her tears and smiled. "I finally understand," she whispered to her maid of honor. Why he kept saying this wedding meant more than just love. After the hug, the groom turned to the judge. "Now," he said with a gentle smile, "I'm ready." The judge smiled back. "Then let's begin again." Properly this time, the ceremony resumed. But now, it had more meaning, more love, more truth, and in the hearts of everyone watching, a deep sense that this wedding was about much more than to people. That was about gratitude. It was about courage. It was about someone who gave and never asked for anything in return. But still, more was yet to come, because not everyone at the wedding wanted this truth to be shared, and soon, someone would try to silence it. The wedding had restarted, but people weren't only focused on the vows. Something deeper was happening now. A truth was unfolding. The groom had just shared the story of Mr. Thomas, his former teacher, and how that quiet man once gave him a future when he had nothing. Everyone in the garden sat quietly. Their hearts moved, but not everyone felt comfortable with this moment. The rich guest, the one who had whispered to the planner, the one who called the police, sat in the third row, arms crossed, eyes cold. He leaned toward the man next to him and whispered, "He didn't have to say all that." The other guest didn't answer. He simply looked away. The truth had made the room silent, but it had also made some people uncomfortable, and one of them wasn't ready to let it go. The ceremony continued. The bride and groom said their vows. They promised love, support, and honesty. There were smiles again, tears of joy, laughter from the crowd. But as the ceremony ended and the couple walked back down the aisle hand in hand, the rich guest stood up quickly and walked toward the back of the garden. He took out his phone and made a quiet call. "They're making a scene out of this teacher's story," he whispered. "Do something about it now." He didn't know someone was watching. Back at the front, the newlyweds were taking photos. Mr. Thomas stood beside them, smiling with pride. The groom held his teacher close, saying, "Sir, I want everyone here to know your name. Today is just as much about you as it is about me." But just then, one of the wedding staff came running. "Sir, we have a small problem," he said to the groom. "What happened?" the groom asked. "There's someone here, from the local press. They said they were invited to write about your success story, but someone just told them to leave. Told them the story was fake." "Fake?" The groom frowned, double quotes. "Yes. Someone told them your teacher never taught you, that you made it all up for attention." The bride's eyes widened. "Who would say that?" Mr. Thomas looked confused. "Why would anyone do that?" The groom's face darkened. He knew exactly who it was. He turned and saw the rich guest standing near the garden gate, pretending to look at his phone. The groom walked straight to him. "Did you talk to the reporters?" he asked. The guest didn't even look up. "I told them the truth. No one knows who this man is. He just showed up out of nowhere. He was my teacher," the groom replied firmly. "You heard everything I said." The guest scoffed. "Words are cheap. Maybe you're just trying to look good. Maybe you're trying to get sympathy." "Sympathy," the bride said, stepping in. "This man gave his childhood to helping students. He never asked for attention." The guest shrugged. "Well, not everyone wants a sad story at a wedding. Some of us came to celebrate, not cry over a teacher." That was it. The groom turned to the crowd, raising his voice just loud enough to be heard. "Everyone, I need your attention." The guest turned toward him again. "This man," he said, pointing to Mr. Thomas, "changed my life. And now someone here is trying to erase that to make it sound fake, but I won't stay silent." He walked over to Mr. Thomas. "I want you all to know something else I didn't say earlier." The crowd leaned in. "I grew up in a rough neighborhood," the groom began. "No father, a sick mother. Most days, I went to school hungry." He looked down. "One day, I got into a fight, a real bad one. I was angry. I was tired. I was ready to give up. The school wanted to expel me." He looked back up at Mr. Thomas, but he stood up for me. He told the principal, "Let me work with him. Let me show him another way." The guests were quiet. "He took me after school every day. He helped me study. He helped me believe I could be more." The groom turned back to the rich guest. "Maybe you don't understand that kind of struggle. Maybe you've always had what you needed." He pointed to his heart. "But some of us, we survived because someone gave us hope." The bride took his hand, and one by one, the guests began to clap. It started small, but it grew louder. Even the wedding planner clapped. The photographer, the flower girl's mother, the man who brought the chairs. Everyone clapped except the guest who made the call. He walked away slowly, disappearing through the back gate. Mr. Thomas stood still, moved but quiet. He looked around and saw something he never expected. People finally seeing him, not as just a quiet man in the back row, but as a hero. And yet, he had more to say. Because even this story wasn't the full truth. He had been keeping a secret too, one he had never told anyone, not even the groom. And soon, that secret would come out, one that would leave the entire wedding in total silence. The sun was setting slowly. Golden light fell across the wedding garden, painting everything with warmth. People were no longer just guests at a wedding. They were witnesses to a powerful story. Everyone was still thinking about what the groom had said. They watched Mr. Thomas now with new eyes, not as a stranger, but as a man who changed a life. But Mr. Thomas had not spoken much. He had smiled, he had nodded, he had accepted the love, but there was something in his eyes, a heaviness, as if he was carrying something deep inside. The bride noticed it first. She walked gently to him and said, "Is everything okay, sir?" Mr. Thomas looked at her, then at the groom. Then he said quietly, "There's something I haven't told you." The groom stepped forward. "What is it, sir?" Mr. Thomas took a deep breath. "You were not the only one I helped," he said slowly, "but you were the one I cared for the most." The groom smiled. "I always felt that. You gave me more than just lessons." Mr. Thomas nodded. "I did, because I saw myself in you." The crowd leaned in. The bride looked confused. "What do you mean?" Mr. Thomas turned toward the guests and said, "Many years ago, before I became a teacher, I was just like him." Everyone listened closely. "I grew up in the same kind of place, poor, lost, angry at the world. But someone helped me, a teacher, just like I became later. He changed my path." Mr. Thomas's voice trembled a little. "I promised myself I would do the same for someone else." He looked at the groom again. "And then I met you. You were angry, smart, and quiet, just like me. I knew I had to guide you." The groom blinked, holding back emotion. "But there's more," Mr. Thomas added. "Something I never told you. Something I never told anyone." The guests were silent. "I was sick," he said. "Even back then, when I taught you, my health was getting worse. But I kept teaching because you gave me purpose." The bride gasped softly. "I left the school after your class graduated because my condition got worse. I didn't want anyone to see me getting weak, so I disappeared." He paused. "But when you found me again, when you invited me here, I realized something." "What?" the groom asked, his voice shaking. Mr. Thomas smiled gently. "That I had done my job. That my life had meant something." Tears ran down the groom's face. "You saved me," he said, "and you gave my life meaning." Mr. Thomas replied. The bride placed her hand on Mr. Thomas's shoulder. "You're more than a teacher," she said. "You're part of this family." Now the guests clapped again, louder this time. The moment was deep, real, powerful. And then Mr. Thomas's son stepped forward, a quiet teenager, around 16. He looked nervous, but he spoke. "My father is the greatest man I've ever known," he said. "He may not have had money or fame, but he made a difference, and I want to be like him." Everyone clapped again, many with tears in their eyes. Then the bride's father stepped forward. He had been silent all this time, watching, listening. But now he looked straight at Mr. Thomas. "I judged you when you arrived," he admitted. "I didn't know who you were. I assumed you didn't belong." He lowered his head, "And I was wrong." Mr. Thomas smiled softly. It's never too late to learn. The mood of the wedding had changed completely. It was no longer just about flowers, food, or dance. It had become a celebration of truth, of courage, of kindness that lasted through time. The rich guest who tried to silence the story had already left in shame, and the people who stayed now saw something they would never forget. But even with so much revealed, there was one more twist waiting. Because the groom's past wasn't just filled with pain, there was someone else from that past, someone who had stayed hidden all this time, and they were about to walk in, uninvited. A new secret was about to unfold, and it would shake the entire wedding. Again, the wedding was now more than just a celebration of love. It had become a story of honor, truth, and old wounds finally healing. People were still talking about Mr. Thomas, the kind teacher, who changed a poor boy's life. They praised the groom for sharing his story. They wiped away tears, and in their hearts they knew they had witnessed something rare. But just as things began to calm down, a voice came from the entrance. "I didn't think you'd actually make it in life, Jay." Everyone turned. A tall, well-dressed man stood at the garden gate, holding sunglasses in one hand and a mocking smile on his face. The groom froze. The bride whispered, "Who is that?" The groom didn't answer right away. His face had turned pale. Mr. Thomas stepped forward. His eyes narrowed. "That's him," the groom finally said. "My old bully." Gasps filled the air. The man walked in slowly, looking around. "Nice wedding. Fancy. Not bad for someone who used to beg for pencils." The bride stepped protectively beside her husband. "Why are you here?" she asked. The man shrugged. "I heard there was a lot of attention around this wedding. Thought I'd stop by." "You weren't invited," the groom said firmly. "No." The man smiled. "But neither was your teacher. Remember? And yet here we are." A few guests murmured uneasy. The groom took a deep breath. "This man used to make my life hell," he said. "In school, he called me names, tore my books, and laughed at my clothes. He laughed when I had no lunch. He told others I'd never be anything." The crowd was silent again, but then, to everyone's surprise, the rich guest who had earlier called the police stepped forward. He looked straight at the uninvited man. "I know you," he said. "Your father was on my board. You used to come to events." The man smirked. "Yes, and you always said poor kids don't belong in good schools." The rich guest's face turned red. The groom stared at both of them. "So that's it?" he said. "The same people who tried to push me out then are the ones trying to ruin this day now." The uninvited man laughed. "Come on, you really think this little teacher saved your life? You made your own way?" Mr. Thomas stepped forward, his voice calm but powerful. "He didn't just make his way, he earned it. While you used your father's name, he used his pain as fuel." The man's face tightened. "And while you were mocking others," Mr. Thomas continued, "he was dreaming of becoming better, and he did." The crowd clapped. The bully's face turned cold. "I could ruin you," he said to the groom. "You already tried," the groom replied, "and you failed." The bride stepped forward. "You don't scare anyone here," she said. "This is a place of love, not hate." Security quietly appeared at the side of the garden. The wedding planner nodded, and 2 guards walked the man. "You'll need to leave," one guard said politely. The man tried to protest, but no one listened. He was escorted out slowly, as the crowd stayed silent, not out of fear, but because of how full their hearts were. They had just seen something powerful. A man who once felt powerless now stood tall, defended by the very people he once thought didn't care, and the ones who tried to bring him down. They had been exposed. After the man left, the groom turned to the guests again. "Let me say this one last time," he said. "This day is not just about love between 2 people. It's about justice, it's about respect, it's about truth." He looked at Mr. Thomas, his voice softening. "You didn't just save me, you helped me fight back, with kindness." Mr. Thomas smiled gently. "You did the fighting, Jay. I only reminded you who you were." Everyone clapped again, louder, longer, deeper, and this time no one whispered, no one judged, no one doubted. But still, one last surprise remained, because someone had been listening from the shadows. Someone from Mr. Thomas's past, someone with a secret that would change everything, even how the teacher saw himself, and that person was about to speak. As the sun dipped low behind the trees, casting long golden shadows across the wedding garden, the mood had shifted again. The ceremony was over, the tears had dried, the bullies were gone. But something still lingered in the air, something unspoken. People were beginning to eat, laugh again, and take photos. But Mr. Thomas sat quietly at the edge of the garden, away from the center. He stared at the wedding lights, a soft smile on his face, yet his eyes looked far away, like he was remembering another time, another life. Then, a familiar voice called out, "Mr. Thomas?" He turned. One of the police officers from earlier had returned, the younger one with a kind face. "Officer," Mr. Thomas said. Surprised, the officer walked over slowly, removing his cap. "I'm sorry to disturb the celebration," he said, "but I had to come back." Mr. Thomas nodded gently. "Is everything all right?" The officer paused. He looked nervous. "No," he said, "and that's why I'm here." The guests nearby quieted as they noticed the officer speaking. The groom and bride also turned, watching from a distance. "I owe you an apology, sir," the officer said. "When we got that call, we didn't ask questions, we just acted." Mr. Thomas replied kindly, "You were doing your job." The officer looked down. "Maybe, but I didn't do it with fairness. I looked at you, and I assumed." He took a deep breath. "That was wrong." Mr. Thomas remained silent, letting the officer speak. "I joined the force to protect people, all people, but today, I realized that sometimes we protect the loudest voices, not the right ones." The groom stepped forward now, standing beside his old teacher. The officer continued, "I didn't know your name before. Now I do, and I'll never forget it." He held out his hand. Mr. Thomas slowly reached out and shook it. "Thank you for coming back," he said softly. The crowd clapped. This time, for both men. The officer wasn't finished. "There's something else," he added. "After I left earlier, I called my dad." Mr. Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Your dad?" "Yes," the officer said. "I remembered something strange. Years ago, he told me about a teacher who helped him stay in school when he was close to dropping out." The officer's voice lowered. "He said that teacher even walked him home when he was scared, gave him money for lunch, helped him believe in himself." He pulled out a photo from his pocket, old, folded, and faded. "Is the teacher," he said. "This is you." Mr. Thomas looked at the photo. It was him, younger, smiling, standing beside a teenage boy in a school uniform. Tears welled up in Mr. Thomas's eyes. "Your father was Robert Lewis?" "Yes." The officer nodded. Mr. Thomas covered his mouth. "He was one of my first students." The officer smiled. "And he never forgot you. I just never connected the name until today." The moment was too much. Mr. Thomas sat down slowly, his chest rising and falling. The bride brought him a glass of water. The teenage boy, Mr. Thomas's son, stood beside him and held his shoulder. "You don't realize the lives you've touched." "Dad," he said, "even when you forgot, they remembered." The crowd clapped again, some standing, some crying. The groom hugged his teacher once more. You saved generations, he whispered. Not just me. And for the first time that day, Mr. Thomas wept, not from sadness, but from something deeper. Gratitude, pride, relief. The sun was almost gone now. The garden lights glowed, people danced slowly, laughter returned, and in the middle of it all sat a man who once thought he was just a teacher. But now, everyone knew the truth. He was a builder of lives, a quiet hero, but the story wasn't over yet, because one final moment remained. One that no one expected, and it would come not from the groom, not from the guests, but from someone who had been quiet all day, someone holding a letter in their hand. A letter that would change everything. The stars had started to appear in the sky. The garden lights twinkled softly above the guests as they enjoyed dinner, desserts, and quiet conversations filled with emotion. Mr. Thomas sat near the couple, surrounded by warm faces. No one treated him like a stranger anymore. People came one by one, some to say thank you, some to hug him, and some just to sit beside him in silence. The groom and bride couldn't stop smiling, even after all the chaos. Their wedding had become something unforgettable, something bigger than they had ever imagined. But then, someone stepped forward, a young girl, around 20, wearing a soft blue dress. She had been quiet the whole time, sitting at the back with a small envelope in her hand. She walked toward Mr. Thomas slowly, her voice shaking a little. "Excuse me, sir," she said. He looked up gently. "Yes, dear." She held out the envelope. "My mother asked me to give this to you. If I ever met you." Mr. Thomas looked confused. "Your mother?" "She passed away last year," the girl said. "But before she did, she told me about a teacher who helped her escape a very dark life, who helped her read, believe in herself, and dream again." Mr. Thomas's hands shook slightly as he took the letter. He opened it slowly. The handwriting was old, faded. He read the first line. "Dear Mr. Thomas, if you're reading this, I want you to know, you saved me. I was lost, ashamed, and broken when I entered your classroom. But you looked at me with kindness. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." He stopped reading aloud. His lips trembled, his eyes filled again. "You taught me to write my first story. You helped me apply for college. You told me my voice mattered. I became a writer because of you. And I raised my daughter to carry your kindness with her." The young girl whispered, "That was my mom." Mr. Thomas looked at her as if he was seeing her mother again, the child he once taught, now living on through her daughter. The bride and groom stood beside him, their arms gently around his shoulders. That moment became the final piece of the story. A teacher who thought he was forgotten had never been forgotten at all. The garden became quiet again, not because people were unsure, but because they were deeply moved. Then the groom raised his glass. "I'd like to make one final toast," he said. Everyone turned. "To the man who gave without asking. To the man who built futures in silence. To the teacher who became a legend today." He looked at Mr. Thomas. "To you, sir." Everyone stood. They raised their glasses. They clapped. They smiled through tears. And in that garden, under the stars, something beautiful happened. A teacher was honored. A student became a man. And a wedding turned into a story that no one would ever forget.